What makes someone remarkable? Do you mind being described as the white people whisperer? What is the optimal age to get married?
That year was the first year that we ever heard a teacher talk about race.
Is the college application process fair?
You start to find the non-obvious way kind of works.
Is there like a cartoonist community? So many times when we go live with these things, it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom.
Boom.
Welcome to the Non-Obvious Book Review. I am Rohit Bhargava, your host, and today I have Neil Hoyne, who is the Chief Measurement Strategist at Google, and he's written a book called Converted, the Data-Driven Way to Win Your Customers' Hearts. Neil, how are you?
I'm doing great, Rohit. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And the first question we have to start with is what makes Converted a non-obvious idea?
I'd probably say the easiest way to explain it is it's a data book for non-data people. And so early on, when I was writing it, you have the understanding. I look at it. I spend a lot of my time with data and measurement. I can't tell you the last time I read a data and measurement book at night. It's like you get those precious hours in the evening away from the kids. You can watch TV. And what are you going to do? I want to pick up a book and read about data. And so really what the goal of the book was is to say, let's take all the power of what data can be and can do to help businesses, to help organizations, and put it in something that's interesting to read. That's intuitive, that allows people to build on their intuition and make it not only accessible so that they can add their own thoughts and ideas, but also make it enjoyable. And hopefully opening up the door to say, I want to learn more about these fields. It really addresses a question, one of the largest questions I wrestle with, which is a lot of great stuff with data. And I hate going into meetings where you say, oh, who's doing the data stuff? And they kind of point to the people at the end of the table. Yeah. They're like, those are our data people. You talk data and data science as an abstract topic. You talk about that later. I wanted to bring it into the mainstream. And so where that catches people a little bit by surprise is that I've had some people reach out to say, I wouldn't consider myself a data person, but I really enjoyed the book because this is an entirely new area that you've opened up for me where I actually feel like I can do the data thing. It's just, it had to be presented, taught in a slightly different way.
Yeah, and making data enjoyable does seem like a pretty tall order, especially when we all have been in those meetings where we do the whole presentation and maybe the last slide is related to data and measurement. I mean, it's always sort of relegated at the end. And one of the things
the footnote nobody reads.
That's right.
we did data here just to check that.
Yeah, you
box.
had a funny story in the book about how there was a footnote that actually said, I pulled this data out of my ass or something like that. Nobody actually replaced it.
Oh,
and nobody noticed really. I mean, I guess you noticed, but no one else noticed.
No, nobody. Sometimes it happens, right? People put those footnotes on there. It's like,
hey, I've done
and it gives people just that check mark that says, oh, we did something. There's a deeper story here.
Insert data here.
And that was what happened for those of you that haven't read it. It was really a group of consultants missed taking that out. And so what I learned in their process, and this was early in my career, but I was surprised by it, was that they figured out the story they wanted to tell first.
Yeah.
And then they found data that they could plug in to support it. And so their narrative process, and this is a large consulting firm, was let's fill in and be like, well, we don't have a data point here that says this market is growing, but we know that's going to be part of our story. And so they would just kind of fill in a number and they'd put these placeholders in and be like, I pulled this number out of my ass. And they were supposed to go back through and remove these references and replace them with actual data. Mm-hmm. But it didn't happen.
Right.
And I was surprised because you kind of have that moment like that pops up. I get that moment if I type something wrong on a slide. I'm watching this presentation and it says clearly at the bottom, it's like, we made this up.
Right.
And nobody noticed.
That's the interesting part, isn't it?
I was like, oh, I guess this is a growth.
Yeah, that's the fascinating part that nobody noticed. I mean, I have a slide in one of my keynote presentations that people love, and it says 82% of statistics are entirely made up. And there's no reference, obviously, because, I'm just throwing it out there. But like that is kind of what happens too often.
That is what happens.
Yeah.
That is what happens. And it's just a problem. So hopefully the book at least works towards addressing that. Or at least making people more aware of where these problems
Well, the place you start the book with, which is interesting, is you try and reframe the conversation around data to go beyond clicks and conversions to talk more about conversations. And a lot of the book kind of returns to this message of you shouldn't be paying only attention to these clicks and conversions and these numbers. You should also be trying to have a conversation with a customer. So what does that mean, have a conversation? And how do you measure that through the data?
I'd say the overarching theme, as you touch on, is that oftentimes when we look at data on its own. as an abstract concept of numbers, clicks, conversions, percentages. And we have to be told what that means. And so really where the book approaches is to say, wait a minute, before any of these numbers come through, before Excel even exists, there's somebody on the other side of that computer that's clicking on your website, that's interacting with your business. Let's start with the fact that there's a person there. And if that person walked into your store, how would you approach that person? Would you simply walk up to the person and be like, oh, welcome to our store. Buy now, one left. To be like, no, God, that's awkward. You want to understand them, their needs, build trust. And if you start with that lens, a lot of these problems become evident, not only around how you can engage and build conversations with customers, but the problems with the marketing approaches today. Marketing approaches today largely are built around this idea that we want to measure these things. And in order to measure them, that means people need to come to our store and buy right away. And if they don't, our time was a failure. And I draw a comparison to this. Is that really how it works? Early on, talking about it's very similar to a whole bunch of marketers walking into a bar and just proposing immediately to people because that's their KPI, the number of proposals accepted. And you're sitting there being like, as a customer, God, how ridiculous that might be. Like everyone walking around, will you marry me? Will you marry me? Will you no? And then justifying, be like, oh, they must be in the wrong place. I only want people that want to get married. And then to say, well, what if you take a step back from that? What if you say people, they may be interested in marriage. They may be interested in buying your products, but they want to get to know you. They want to get to know your brand. How would you approach things differently if you didn't have to propose to them at the end of the night? Mm. And then could we actually measure that and apply rigor to it? And then we ask the larger question. And then say you had a great conversation with that person, but they didn't propose, they didn't accept the proposal right away. What would you say on the second meeting with them? Or the third? And what slowly starts to emerge is the fact that just like in the real life where we have different relationships with different people, where some people, like your friends, your family, are going to be close and add so much value to your life. And you're going to have some transactional people. I joke like the Uber driver that takes you from the airport. You're also going to have a lot of people like that for your business. People that contribute a lot of value, that love your business, will buy any product you put out at any price. And you're going to have other people that come in just when you're offering them a sale with a large promotional discount. And all we want to understand is who's who. And what this data is really revealing is it's summarizing all these relationships in numbers, but behind them are real people who want to have different types of relationships with your business, will offer different amounts of value, are people you should listen to versus ignore. And this entire book is really just making that case to say everybody can understand who these people are and what they want next.
Doing that and having a conversation does sound like a lot of work. Do you feel like the amount of effort is a barrier, and how do you simplify that for companies?
It can be a lot of effort for businesses that have just really started their marketing, their processes around this transactional method to say, I want you to abandon everything that you're doing. But then we take a step back and we say, and I often joke about this, my wife is not pleased with this analogy, but I bring it up. She says it's not true. But I tell her, I say, look, we've been married for 8 years. I was like, I'm not the best person for you in this world. I'm just the best you found. And maybe that's enough. It's like,
that's surprising she
like,
doesn't like that.
Really bad guys.
You know, that's usually what every woman wants to hear.
then I met you, and all right. And she disagrees. She's like, no, you are the perfect person. Out of 8 billion people now in this world, I found you. It's so touching.
That's nice.
But I say that also within the lens to take off a little bit of pressure on this marketing, to say you don't need to know everything to say to every customer and be able to measure everyone perfectly. What you need to be is slightly better than the competition. And so if the competition is like, we're only buy now, and you're like, I at least want to give a little room for conversation. I want to get to know you and what you want. I want to educate you more about our products and services. I want to be able to give you information without forcing you to fill out a lead form. Or even more importantly, if you buy once, I want to have some sense as to where this relationship is going. Even if it's far from perfect, the goal is that you're building a better connection with your customers than other businesses who haven't taken that step. And so nothing is an argument that you should be perfect. To be perfect, be like, I need to know the exact right thing to say to this person at all times. Otherwise, I'm not going to go up to them. No, it doesn't work that way. It's you try some things and you're going to get slightly better at it. And so the book is really built around that iterative approach to say, I want you to be better. I don't want you to obsess about being perfect.
In your role working at Google, you mentioned early on in the book, you've worked with thousands of companies, I think more than 2,000 companies. And so you've seen a lot of different approaches to digital marketing. You've seen a lot of different approaches to how people consume numbers and act on them or don't act on them.
Don't act on them.
Some of the stories that you talk about in the book, which I find most fascinating, is the moments when you think you have the answer through data, but you realize that you actually need to keep iterating. Like there was one moment where you talked about a story of a hotel that was spending a lot of money on search marketing and then figured out that a lot of people were clicking on those ads to just reconfirm their reservation. And so they were wasting money reaching people who had already booked. And so they decided to do something, but that turned out to be not what they expected. Can you just share that story? I just thought that one in particular really stuck out for me.
Sure. It was simple. In that case, it was an email marketing campaign, which they thought would be helpful, reminding people who booked hotel rooms with them that their hotel stay was coming up. And they thought, hey, we're going to be helpful. And what they found out was by sending people those emails, it actually reminded people that they have rooms that they should cancel. So they went through and they all said, oh, okay, well, that's not good because now they're canceling rooms. We shouldn't send that email. But then they found out that they had customers who were then upset that they weren't reminded and were charged. And it ties to this iteration process, but it actually lies to a larger story. I didn't include this in the book. We actually scrapped this at the last minute, but maybe I should have. A gentleman I work with, Google has a lot of smart people. I work with one gentleman who is a literal rocket scientist. So he has a PhD in physics. And now I kind of joke with him. I was like, you went from building rockets, or at least writing papers about building rockets, to getting people to click on pictures. I was like, explain that to me.
Seems like a downgrade.
I find, well, that's the thing. I was like, it's like, really? And he's like, I find marketing to be harder. And he's like, in my world, we have constants, gravity, mass, acceleration. 100-level undergraduate course will teach you how much energy you need to throw something into orbit. He's like, there's not a 100-level graduate course that I could give anybody that says, here's how many ad clicks it takes or what you say to somebody to get them to buy a product. Even if you understand that story is dynamically changing. And what his argument was is he's like, marketers are awfully apologetic. I'm sorry, I don't know the right answer. I'm sorry, I don't know what exactly is happening. But the lesson there really is that marketers have to understand how difficult human behavior actually is. And not to be apologetic about it, but just to say the reward is in the continual pursuit to say, look, it's that next email. What's that next hypothesis that you have? And can you get to that conclusion before somebody else? And it's always going to change. It's always going to be dynamic, but that's part of the fun. And kind of reframing back, though, another way I like to look at it, we're very proud of bears here in California. Like we got one on our flag. And I kind of joke with people about this metaphor where a lot of the problems that businesses are faced with, whether we're talking about data, marketing in general, talking about digital transformation, a lot of businesses look at it. And I look at these problems. I say, think about it really as a bear chasing you in the forest. Right now, it's scary because we can't outrun bears. And for a lot of companies, they struggle to be like, we want to be better with data, but this is a tall order. Right. And meanwhile, things are getting worse and worse as we sit there. And so what do businesses do? They recognize the problem. They're good at that by saying, we need to get better at data or we're going to fall behind, or machine learning or privacy. We need to get better at it. And so what they do is a very business thing. Talk about the obvious thing. They say, we're going to get a committee together. We're going to get all the smartest people in the room and say, damn it, we're going to solve this problem. And I tell them, I say, you know, the best companies I work with are the ones that say, all right, bear's coming at us. How about we just start running? Can we just, get a little bit more
Let's not overthink it.
Us in the bear? Like, where are we running? It's like, I don't know, but sitting here is not a good idea. So let's go. And what you realize of those companies is that they distinctly, by their own merits or not, realize that the solution to their problem is not outrunning the bear. That's an impossibility. Their solution is outrunning other campers. And the way that they look at success with these areas around marketing and data is not that they need to be perfect. They just need to be better than the other people that are out there. They need to grow just a little bit faster. They need to run a little bit faster. And that takes a lot of pressure off of them to say, we don't need to solve this. We're not trying to solve in data science. We're not trying to solve the absolute problem. Human behavior is far too complicated. Right? What we're trying to do is solve for growth. Can we use a little bit of our understanding, a little bit of our data to make a little bit more money? And then repeat that process. That's it.
Yeah, one of the things that was fascinating about the way that we think about data and that you counsel against in many cases is A, not collecting too much data, and B, the point that really resonated with me was don't ask questions that are going to result in answers that don't change what you do. Talk about the collection of data. Like, are we collecting too much data?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We're collecting data because, and there's various iterations on it, so I won't go down it, but just that general data is the new oil theme leads people to a very visceral understanding to be like, so if I capture more data, then this is value, that I'm creating value simply by capturing this data. And you say, what are you doing with it? It's like, oh, we're going to have one CMO be like, well, we're going to hire some data scientists and they're going to do data science to it. And then that unlocks the value. And what we're really finding is a disconnect where people are collecting data hoping that they can stare at these spreadsheets or somebody else can and make sense of it. And what we're seeing in more modern companies now is they're saying, let's forego the data collection for a moment. Let's not let data collection lead our efforts. Let's let our hypotheses lead our efforts. What do we think is happening? What do we think is creating value for our firm? What do we think is destroying value? And in some cases, it's very simple. We think our loyalty program leads people to stay more often and spend more money. Okay, that's a valid hypothesis. We think asking people these survey questions, asking people surveys increases their value. We think that's it. People that, one of the things we discuss in the book, that buy gifts for other people, we think that creates value. One of the other hypotheses, we think people that take things out of their shopping cart, that curate their shopping cart, are closer to purchase than people that add things in. They start with those hypotheses and then they say, well, what data do we have, or what data do we need to prove or disprove that hypothesis? And so they're collecting data with a specific intention in mind. Now, there is a third question on there. How would we act based on if this hypothesis were true, which I think is equally relevant? We'll leave that aside for a moment. But you can see how data science efforts went from let's just collect and aggregate to let's try to make some sense out of it, to starting and saying, let's get everybody in the business to ask a question first. What do we think is happening in our business? What do we think our customers need? And then using that data to prove or disprove that is a much more rational and much more productive way to lead with data. And that doesn't require the mass collection of everything you know about your customers. It's to say, we want to answer this question and let's find data in pursuit of it.
One of the things that strikes me is the relationship between figuring out what data to collect or pay attention to and creativity. And one of the things that I often thought in the lore of companies getting founded, and Amazon in particular, how Amazon was founded, is I always thought and read that Jeff Bezos started Amazon and focused on books because they're non-perishable, they're relatively consistent to ship. But the story you tell is a little bit different than that in terms of why he focused on books, and it's pretty nuanced in terms of the data it allowed him to collect. So talk a little bit about that and the insight from that other companies and individuals might be able to apply to their own data collection.
Sure. And as far as I can tell, Jeff only mentioned this in a New Yorker interview, but thankfully the article's still online in public for us. And what it really talks about was that to say, look, books are nice because they scale well, they ship easily, you can scale systems across millions of different identical SKUs. But really the underlying pattern was to say, I want to build some really great relationships. And if I'm going to build a retailer, what is a great relationship? A great relationship is someone with high amounts of income and they like to spend it. So high net worth individuals with high amounts of disposable income. And it's to say, well, I need to sell them something. What do they want to buy? And so he went through the category data and found out that books actually reach those customers as a product more than low net worth, low disposable income individuals. And so he said, I'm going to start here. These are the customers that I want because I can build great relationships and then I can sell them anything. And because they have more money and they spend more money, it means that I'll likely have more money then to spend on customer service, on building my infrastructure, on building my company, than trying to service everybody in the market. So effectively, I'm not going to worry so much about the people that aren't going to buy repeatedly from me. And you can imagine for those people that were only thinking about transactions, this was really hard to understand. Picture a whole bunch of traditional book retailers being like, wait a minute, doesn't have the brick and mortar presence, you're packaging stuff up, shipping it. We have relationships with publishers. We're all selling the same product. Yeah, all right, Amazon, this must be a nice .com story. But with him, it didn't end with books. It was once I have those, I can expand to other categories. I can launch Prime. I can launch free 2-day delivery, which was still unheard of at that time because those customers would spend more money. And so that's why Amazon still today argues that they're the most customer-centric company on earth. I would argue they have a legitimate claim to it because it starts with how do we build those relationships with our customers that are willing to spend the most? And then how do we keep them? And that's tough to compete with if your only story is, I'm going to go out and just keep proposing to people on that first date.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it seems like the book itself and how it was written for you might have been sort of a cathartic experience to be able to say all the stuff that maybe you couldn't say to customers. Was that part of your motivation in wanting to get this book out? Just seeing customers. I mean, you talk multiple times about giving people beautiful data and perfect insights. And then they're like, yeah, we're not going to use that. We're going to go this way. We're going to go this direction. And then they fail. So it's not an I told you so, but like it sucks to not be able to say that somewhere else. Right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, individuals, I can often say this too. I've often found that individual executives are fairly rational. Organizations, though, work in much different ways. Or people will weigh that to be like, look, I could bring this up in my own organization, but is it worth the promotion? Is it worth upsetting the boss? I'd say where it changed for me, this is a little bit of the backstory. When I started dabbling with writing, this was really designed to be written for the CEO and the CMO. And I started writing in a particular tone that was very much how I was presenting at that time. It's like, let's give you the strategy. There has to be a 2x2 somewhere because everyone wants a 2x2. You always have to have 3 recommendations, never 4. 4 sounds unofficial. And as the pandemic hit and we went into lockdown, I had at that time, my kids were 1 and 4, kind of wandering around, wondering what it is we do all day. And I kind of asked my son, because he was old, I was like, what do you think I do? He's like, Mommy types a lot and you go to a whole bunch of meetings. And I was like, that's her understanding of the world. And I thought, you know what? Instead of writing it for a CEO, why don't I write it for my kids? Now, they can't read at this point, but what if in 15, 20 years, they decide God help them to go into data analytics or marketing, and they're curious to be like, what advice do you have? And I would say, you know what? I'm taking this time and I'm just going to write down some of my best advice in this book. And what's great when you think about writing for your kids is they already love you. You hope. I think they do. You write for them. They already love you. You don't want to be disingenuous with them. You don't want to talk in a different way. You not only want them to hear your voice in those messages, to recognize it, but you also want to be as brutally honest and candid with them as you can. And I found that to be really helpful in writing, because then I didn't care if somebody disagreed with the point of view. I can be as honest as I can. And that later on, it felt very therapeutic when you're writing that. It's like, whew, it's good to get that out. But you also realize how the audience influences the message that you want to bring. Whereas if somebody told you, if a powerful CEO is like, do you think our data science is doing the right thing? You'd be like, I'm going to soften up the blow for it. But when you really know what they need to hear. And so that was just part of the writing process where I just kind of thought, I was like, look, my goal isn't necessarily to make anyone happy. My goal is to be as honest as I can about what I see, with no agenda, with no pretense, not even pitching a Google product. Just, this is the way that the world looks from the experience I have.
You do focus on common terms that are out in business. Do you think digital transformation is a bullshit term?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. A lot of them are because even I could push back with a lot of the things around cloud. I think that they're clever marketing positions. People talk to me about cloud. I say, no, the really decision is, do you want to rent or buy your infrastructure? That's what it is. It's not that there's a magical cloud where all this stuff happens. Rent or buy, that's your choice. Digital transformation, I think, started off in a wholesome way. Here's a traditional process we have that's not using technology, maybe pen and paper, which there were some companies. Let's see if we can use this computer stuff to make them better. And that was a legitimate digital transformation. And when companies say, look, we went from using something that was offline, that was manual, that was inefficient, to using digital to capture that, I think that's the purest transformation. What I think happened, though, was that this term transformation took on to say, this is a strategic imperative for businesses. And there were a lot of businesses that didn't necessarily understand the process. They're like, wow, everyone's digitally transforming. We need to digitally transform. And then software vendors and consultancies came and be like, we'll transform your business for you. And they just threw a whole bunch of software at the problem. And then other people are kind of looking, they're like, did we transform yet? Are we there yet? And everyone's like, oh shit, we spent a lot of money. We better be. And so they celebrated with it, the cake and the ice cream pops. And then you go back and you talk to companies with CRM implementations. They're like, yeah, 90% of companies will say their CRM failed. And they're still doing digital transformation. Here we are 20 years later.
When is the transformation finished?
That's the thing. And so what I'm kind of saying is, I'm like, you're not trying to digitally transform. You're unfortunately stuck in an enterprise sales process where it's like, hey, here's something somebody can sell you and you don't understand it. So you're just gonna be like, yes. And I say, no, what this really is, when we talk about digital transformation, this is a leadership issue. Can you help lead your company to use technology a little bit better, to use your data a little bit better, and to make real progress? Or are you just going to go, this is the equivalent. We're getting into January now, right? Yeah. People are going to go and be like, I'm really out of shape, right? What do I need to do? I need to get in shape. Okay. Gym membership, right? Big, large commitment. I'm going to buy the home gym. Tangible signs of progress. And I'm like, no, I want to advocate. Just get on your shoes and go for a jog. Like immediate progress, no investment. You're going to feel better. And then later you may need that gym. But most people don't. In fact, that was one of the guys I was talking to in that industry was telling me if anybody signs up for a gym membership in January, they're going to come 6 times during that entire year. 4 of them will be in January. And then that's really it. That's the relationship. Nothing transforms, nothing changes, but they spent money. And I was like, this is the thing that I want to avoid with data. I don't want you to buy the gym membership. I don't want you to buy the expensive home gym. I just want to, let's get you the closest to putting on some shoes. Let's go for a jog. and then we'll figure out what to do the next
Well, that
day.
does kind of raise the question of, I mean, you're an expert in using some of the digital tools and platforms. People are coming to, obviously, Google is huge. You probably do have some companies coming to you saying, hey, I want to use the data to sell something that might be slightly evil or maybe sneaky or manipulative. Do you look at those things and say, I probably shouldn't be helping people sell gym memberships if they're only going to use it twice a year because people are wasting money? Or are you kind of like, hey man, the data is the data, and if that's what you want to sell, I can help you sell it?
I haven't had products or services that I disagree with. Generally, I find that for the largest advertisers, those companies need to make something mass market, and those approaches don't work. If somebody did come with it, I'd have an issue with it. If somebody tried manipulating the data, I'd have an issue with it. In fact, one of the earliest projects, and this is what I would say, if you're looking at moments in my career that were most meaningful, was that early on when I joined Google, one of the first projects I did was to look at a new feature we were going to roll out to Google AdWords at the time, is what we called it, that would just change the way that customers bid and behave. And for some customers, the analysis showed that they would spend a lot more money because their ads would be more effective. And so they would see that growth, and based on our assumptions, this would drive revenue. There are a portion of customers that if they adopted this product would spend less with us. Now, I'm new to the company, so of course I looked at some of the senior leaders there, some of the directors, and I showed them the data. And I said, all right, I know you're paid based on how many ads people buy. And I said, so we have two options. We have option one is we roll it out to everybody. There's going to be some people that win and some people that lose, and from the account teams, or we would just roll it out to the accounts where we can grow. And he looked at the data and he's like, well, he's like, so what you're saying is that these people, based on our latest data, are spending too much money with Google. I said, based on the data we have, yes. He's like, all right. He's like, this is easy. He's like, go tell them. Like, you want me to tell people they're spending too much money with Google? He's like, yeah. He's like, and then we fix our products so that we're delivering value. He's like, if we're not delivering value, we will tell every single customer as soon as we learn that there's not value.
Do you think that's unusual?
And then we're going to go
in that space? I mean,
I think it's unusual for it to be declared and spoken to. I think all data scientists that I work with have those aspirations, but I think they kind of hand over the data to sales leaders who make decisions, and then they prioritize it. But for me, it was a powerful signal, the type of culture and how they wanted to use data. Was that data wasn't something that you used to sell. Data was something that you objectively used to make better decisions, better or not. And I was actually surprised because I was thinking, as I go into this organization, here I am a couple months into the company, that I'm going to tell these people that, and who do have quotas, they need to sell, that their money, the money they bring home, could be jeopardized because of a new program that I'm leading. Now, thankfully, this director gave me air cover. He's like, if anybody brings it up, send them to my office. Nobody did. Everybody was okay with it because everybody trusted the data and how it was being used. And I realized in that case that some of the worst organizations to run with are organizations where data is crafted to tell a story, to convince senior leaders to say, this is how they make decisions. In order for me to get promoted, I need to use data in this way.
I need to massage.
And when you see data, we need to massage it. Be like, everyone needs to see how great my contributions were and how this program was a success. And you realize how much more fun and how much more satisfying it is when companies feel, look, the data is what it is. We'll make decisions based on it. And because then they're just looking at it objectively for what it says. And that's part of what's led my career, is to say, these are the people I want to be around, are people that say, look, we'll tell you better or worse what the data says. We're not going to impose our values on you, but you're going to know the truth the best that we see.
It's a pretty noble way to see data. I mean, do you feel like you've written a data book?
I mean, it says data on the cover. I think it touches on data, but just data in a different way than what we see it. I think just data for too many people is just an intimidating area. Just like some people say, so what do you do for a living? I do math. You're like, all of a sudden it's like, whew. It's like you picture like the Good Will Hunting scenes with equations on your walls and stuff. It's like, no, if you're using Excel, you're likely using math. It's just, we need to reframe this to say, this is not the domain of a few specialized wizards. It's something everybody does and everybody needs to participate in.
The book is Converted, The Data-Driven Way to Win Customers' Hearts. I'm talking to Neil Hoyne. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I agree, data can be our superhero friend to transform what we're doing, and I hope companies do read this book and put it into action in their organizations.
Thank you so much for having me.